Hey, it's Patrick from JP Cycles, and let's talk about brake calipers. Now, kind of more specifically, let's talk about brake calipers on cruisers. Now, the basics of this is gonna be kind of motorcycle wide, but specifically, let's look at this through the lens of cruisers. And cruisers, to me, ironically, have always kind of been the worst for their brake system setups. Whereas sport bikes and lighter bikes got hot rod braking, the bigger, heavier cruisers, although slower moving, got worse brake setups, and those big heavy bikes really do need a better braking system. So we're gonna talk about the difference in calipers, but I do wanna say the braking will be affected by the entire system. So braking as a whole is set up with the rotor and the caliper and your master cylinder and your line choice. But for this video, let's just talk about calipers. And depending on the age of your bike, you may have a better caliper on your stock bike or not. You could have a really, really bad caliper. So let's just talk about from the basic setups and then move on into the aftermarket. So your stock bike, especially if you have an older bike, could have as little as a 1-piston caliper. And what I mean by that is the piston is what's in the caliper body that actually applies the pressure to the pads to stop your motorcycle. And what a single means is there's just a piston on one side shoving over from one side with that brake pressure into a pad that's static on the other side. So really that's kind of the minimal amount of pressure you could apply to your brakes, and it was being done out of a single on the front and a single on the rear. Later on, Harley moved up to a 2-piston where that actually might be 1 on each side or 2 on one side pressing against a single pad. Where an upgraded caliper like a Performance Machine or a Brembo or something like that is gonna have 4 pistons at the minimum basically. Unless in some of the PM instances you want that as vintage chopper brakes, they still make the single calipers. But those 4 pistons, what you get is big time braking from either side. So in some of the late model Harleys, you'll say, well, my Harley has Brembos on it. Yes, Brembo is the supplier of brakes for Harley Davidson now. It's not the same as an aftermarket brake, and we'll kind of get into that here in a second, but it is much better. And on some of the older brakes, especially some of the OEM older brakes, you have heavy, heavy castings. And that's another upgrade you get when you move into an aftermarket caliper, is it vents. Heat is one of the number one things that adversely affects your braking. And having those open vents on the back of those calipers allows air to pass through and cool those calipers down, where the old castings didn't have those cutaways and held a lot of heat. Same thing with how some of the PM brakes and Brembo brakes are cut, and a lot of that material is cut away. It allows for better heat dissipation. So again, with the aftermarket caliper, you're not only just getting, better aesthetics, which is a great reason to buy something, especially out in cruiser land, but they also offer superior functionality. And so you may have that 4-piston on your bike from the factory, but it's not the same build quality as a PM or a Brembo or something like that. With aftermarket calipers, you can customize them with different colors, different cuts, kind of to match your bike setup. It doesn't stop at 4-piston calipers. You can get up to a 6-piston caliper. If you want real stopping power, something like the PM 6-piston really is the big bad boy on the block. And again, we'd go from 4 to 6, meaning 3 pistons on each side grabbing that rotor, but it's a little bit more in depth than that. They have differential bore calipers, meaning the piston at the bottom is smaller than a medium one and a larger. As that rotor comes through, it progressively grabs that so it's not such a harsh bite. But that's the other thing you get out of an aftermarket caliper. Besides, much more stopping power, much more grunt to stop those bikes, you can gain a lot of feel with a caliper, meaning like you don't have the on and off feeling. You can kind of lose less input on the lever, you can finesse things with your brakes a little bit more, and it allows for a much better braking experience. Now that we've talked kind of about the sizes of calipers, let's talk about one kind of different caliper that we're seeing more and more on late model bikes, and is an upgrade you can actually retrofit to a Harley, and that's a radial mount brake. Something like the new Indian Challenger or the Indian FTR comes with radial mount, kind of a race spec Brembo on there. And what those radial mounts do is they mount differently than your conventional type of caliper, whereas it moves them away from the fork leg a little more and out to the edge of the rotor, allowing you to run a bigger rotor and moving the biting force of the caliper out to the edge, where it's actually much more effective. If you try to bite onto a small caliper or something in close to where the wheel's spinning, it's not as effective as if you move it out and away. So a radial mount brake is gonna be far superior, better feeling and more power. And you can retrofit those radial mount brakes to your Harleys. A company like Speed Merchant that we carry makes a bracket. You can bolt a radial mount brake on there. Or somebody like PM actually makes a radial mount brake that you can bolt with an adapter right on to your Harley. Again, kind of upgrading you in some upper echelon braking power. But as I mentioned before, this is all dependent on your system. When you upgrade, you're going to want to think about more than just your calipers. So make sure you upgrade those lines, upgrade those rotors. And another thing to think about is if you go from a single to a dual caliper, if you're gonna have those big calipers requiring all that hydraulic force, it's a good idea to upgrade those master cylinders. Harleys in particular, if you go from a single to a dual caliper, you wanna go from a 9/16 bore to an 11/16 bore. And I won't get off into the weeds too much here, but things like radial mount calipers, again, give you much more feel and input on your braking. And I'll use the Indian as an example again. The FTR has that Brembo radial mount caliper right from the factory. Good stuff there. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to drop us a comment. Go ride those motorcycles.